I knew the sound of his lies better than the sound of my own heartbeat. That's how it started, the slow recognition that the rhythm I trusted most wasn't mine, but his, and it was rotten beneath the surface. When I first met Daniel, I thought I'd been handed a miracle. I was standing at a fundraising gala I had no business attending, just a mid-level architect from Boston with a borrowed dress and a second-hand clutch, sweating under the chandelier's cruel light. He arrived at my side like he'd been summoned, tailored suit, teeth like headlines, a glass of champagne balanced perfectly in his hand. He laughed at my nervous joke, and I remember the sound of it, it made the room tilt. Daniel Monroe. The kind of man whose name alone made people step aside. His family owned half the waterfront real estate in Massachusetts, and the other half owed them something. He looked at me like I wasn't just another face in a room full of power brokers and legacy wealth. That was his trick, making you feel chosen. He asked about me, and I told him too much. My modest apartment in Dorchester, my long hours drafting plans for clients who barely remembered my name, my parents who had broken their backs so I could go to school. I was too open, too hungry for someone like him to take me seriously. But he smiled like I was refreshed. Like I was some rare find in a world that bored him. I let myself believe it. Over the weeks that followed, he folded me into his orbit. Suddenly I was stepping into glossy cars, eating at restaurants where the cheapest bottle of wine cost half my rent. At first, I resisted. I wanted to insist on splitting checks, wanted to explain I wasn't some charity project, but he brushed my protests away. "Don't be ridiculous, Sarah," he'd say, brushing his hand over mine like I was made of delicate glass. "You deserve this." Deserve. That word stuck. I'd never thought of myself as someone who deserved luxury, but Daniel made me believe it was possible. Maybe I wasn't as small as I felt. His world was intoxicating. Penthouse views that stretched across the city, the scent of leather and old money clinging to every surface. His friends were polished, their laughter sharp as champagne bubbles. I tried to keep up, but I knew the jokes I told never landed the same way, that my thrift store heels looked flimsy next to their Italian leather. Still, Daniel held me close, his arm looped around my waist like a claim. And I let myself be claimed. But even in those first weeks, there were cracks. The way he sometimes spoke about waitstaff, as if their existence was an inconvenience. The way his friends looked me over with polite disdain, like they were assessing a knockoff handbag. I laughed it off, told myself it didn't matter. Told myself love could bridge the gap between marble floors and hardwood creaks. At night, when I lay beside him in sheets that smelled like dry cleaning and cologne, I whispered to myself that I belonged. That I wasn't an outsider. That he saw something in me worth elevating. But beneath the silk and champagne, there was a pulse I tried to ignore, the quiet suspicion that maybe Daniel loved me not for who I was, but for what I represented, proof that even he, with all his wealth and privilege, could reach into the ordinary world and pluck out something pure. Something unspoiled. I wanted so badly to believe he was different, that he wasn't like the people who measured worth in stock options and summer homes. That's why I didn't listen to the small, insistent voice in the back of my mind, the one that whispered each time he turned away too quickly, each time he laughed at me just a little too sharply. Because love, when you're starved for it, feels like oxygen. And when someone like Daniel offers it, you don't question whether the mask they wear is real. You just breathe. And I did. Until the day I realized the air was poisonous. I didn't grow up with much, but I grew up with enough to understand what mattered. My parents worked themselves to exhaustion to keep a roof over our heads and food on the table. My father was a machinist at a factory in Quincy, his hands perpetually stained with grease, and my mother balanced part-time jobs in retail and bookkeeping while holding our family together with sheer determination. We were middle class in the most fragile sense of the word, one missed paycheck away from collapse, one illness away from debt. Still, there was pride in what they built. Our house wasn't big, but it was ours. The furniture didn't match, but it was clean. My father used to say, "Sarah, we may not have money, but we have dignity. Don't let anyone take that from you." I held on to those words like scripture, though I didn't fully understand what they meant until much later. School was my way out, or so I believed. I threw myself into academics with a desperation that bordered on obsession. Straight A's weren't just letters on a page, they were escape routes, proof that I could claw my way into a different life. Scholarships and part-time jobs paid my way through college, where I studied architecture. I loved it, the balance of creativity and structure, the way I could take an idea and turn it into something solid. Buildings, unlike people, didn't betray you. They stood where you put them, as long as the foundation was strong enough. After graduation, I landed a job at a mid-sized firm in Boston. Not glamorous, not groundbreaking, but stable. The kind of place where hard work was noticed but not celebrated, where clients wanted efficiency, not brilliance. I told myself it was enough. Most days it was. I drafted designs for office spaces and mid-rise apartments, earned a modest salary, and paid my rent on time. But sometimes, when I looked up at the skyline, those glittering towers of glass and steel, I wondered what it would feel like to have my name etched into the city. To create something lasting, something undeniable. Loneliness was the one thing I never quite solved. Relationships had a way of fizzling out. I dated men who admired my drive but wilted under the weight of my ambition, or men who liked the idea of me but recoiled when faced with the reality of my student loans, my modest lifestyle, my refusal to play damsel in distress. Friends paired off, got married, had children. I smiled at their photos on Facebook, told myself my time would come. And then came Daniel. He swept into my life like a storm disguised as a gift. Meeting him at that gala had felt like a twist of fate, the universe finally granting me something extraordinary. He didn't just notice me, he made me feel inevitable. As if all the years of struggle and striving had been leading me to him. At first, I resisted. Men like him didn't date women like me. I told myself it was a fling, something fleeting, destined to burn out once he grew bored. But Daniel never wavered. He pursued me with a patience that disarmed me, taking me to dinners where the waiters knew his name, to parties in brownstones where people discussed hedge funds and ski trips to Aspen. He introduced me as his girlfriend, said the word with a weight that made my chest tighten with disbelief. I tried to hold on to myself, to the girl from Dorchester who knew how to stretch $20 for a week's worth of groceries. But Daniel's world was seductive. I found myself slipping into it, laughing at jokes I didn't quite understand, sipping wines I couldn't pronounce, wearing dresses he bought for me because you deserve to look like the woman I see. Still, the cracks showed. I noticed how his friends' eyes flicked over me, appraising, dismissive. I noticed how Daniel never corrected them when they made casual remarks about dating down. Once, when I tried to tell him how small it made me feel, he kissed me hard enough to silence me and whispered, "Don't listen to them. You're better than all of them." I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to. Because being with him felt like standing in sunlight after years of shadows. He gave me glimpses of a life I'd only seen in magazines, vacations that blurred into postcards, nights in penthouses where the city glittered beneath us like a private stage. He made me feel chosen, and for a girl who had spent her whole life fighting to be seen, that was intoxicating. But beneath the glamour, there was always a tension, a whisper in the back of my mind reminding me that I was out of place. That I was a guest in a world that would never truly accept me. I silenced it, told myself love was enough, told myself Daniel was enough. What I didn't realize then was that vulnerability is a kind of currency. And in Daniel's hands, it was one I was spending recklessly, without ever asking what the cost might be. I thought I was building a future with him. What I was really building was a stage for my own destruction. I used to tell myself every relationship has its shadows. You can love someone and still know they're not perfect. But Daniel's shadows weren't flaws, they were secrets, multiplying in the corners until they swallowed the light. It started with his phone. Daniel had always been casually careless with it. He'd toss it onto the couch, leave it face up on the counter. But one evening, as we were getting ready to head to a dinner party, I noticed he kept the device glued to him, sliding it into his pocket even when he walked into the bathroom. When he came back, his smile felt a beat too late, his kiss landing on my cheek instead of my lips. I told myself it was nothing. Everyone deserves privacy. But then came the late nights. He'd claim he was tied up at the office, managing some investment portfolio crisis, yet he'd come home smelling faintly of cologne I didn't wear and wine I hadn't tasted. Once, when I asked about the new scent clinging to his shirt, he laughed, short, sharp, and said, "God, Sarah, you sound paranoid. Don't be insecure. It's not a good look on you." The word stung more than I let him see. Insecurity had been my constant shadow in his world, but hearing him weaponize it made me fold in on myself. I started to doubt my instincts. Until the gala. It was the same event where I'd first met him, exactly 1 year later, a full circle that should have felt romantic. I wore the dress he'd chosen for me, a black silk slip that made me feel exposed and elegant all at once. He looked perfect, as always, his suit tailored to perfection, his hand possessive on my lower back as we entered the ballroom. And then I saw her. She was laughing, head tilted back, her hand brushing Daniel's arm with a familiarity that pierced me like a blade. She was beautiful in a way that money makes possible, skin like porcelain, a necklace that could buy my entire building, and a confidence that radiated from her like perfume. I recognized her face from society pages, whispered names at dinners I never belonged to. Charlotte Whitmore. Old money, Boston elite, a woman who didn't need to be chosen, because she'd been born chosen. Daniel introduced us with a smoothness that made my stomach twist. Sarah, this is Charlotte. We've known each other forever. His voice had an ease I'd never heard when he spoke about me, like he was returning to his native tongue. Charlotte's smile was polite, distant, but her eyes lingered on me just a fraction too long, as if she were cataloging every thread of my dress, every flaw in my posture. I felt like a child clutching a counterfeit ticket, trying to sneak into a theater where I didn't belong. The rest of the night blurred. Daniel disappeared often, brushing it off with excuses about business contacts. I found myself alone at the edge of the dance floor, champagne glass trembling in my hand, watching him laugh with Charlotte across the room. The intimacy between them was undeniable, an energy too strong to be disguised. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was jealous, that Daniel loved me. But denial can only stretch so far before it snaps. 2 nights later, while Daniel was in the shower, his phone lit up on the nightstand. Normally, I wouldn't look, but something in me, a raw, shaking instinct, reached for it. The message was from Charlotte. Last night was incredible. Same place tomorrow. My breath caught so hard it hurt. I scrolled, my fingers trembling, my vision blurring with tears. Thread after thread of messages appeared, stretching back months. Private jokes, plans, late-night confessions that made my stomach churn. She wasn't just a fling. She was woven into his life with a permanence I could never match. When Daniel emerged from the shower, a towel slung around his waist, I was sitting on the edge of the bed, his phone in my hand. My heart pounded so violently I thought I might faint. Sarah, he said, his voice careful, measured. What are you doing? I held up the phone like evidence in a trial. How long? His eyes flickered, not with shame, not with guilt, but with irritation, as if I'd just broken some unspoken rule. He exhaled, running a hand through his wet hair. You weren't supposed to find out like this. I laughed, a hollow, broken sound. Supposed to? You've been sleeping with her for months, Daniel. He didn't deny it. He didn't even flinch. Instead, he sat down across from me, his tone calm, almost patronizing. Sarah, you're being dramatic. Charlotte and I, we come from the same world. It's complicated, you wouldn't understand. The words landed like gunshots. You wouldn't understand. My middle-class roots, my borrowed dresses, my thrift store heels, they weren't just background noise to him. They were the punchline. Then why me? I whispered, my throat raw. Why pull me into your life if I was never enough? He looked at me for a long moment, and then he smiled. A small, cruel curve of his lips that stripped every illusion I'd clung to. Because you made me feel good about myself, he said. You were, refreshing. But you were never going to last, Sarah. Not in my world. You're not built for it. The words shattered me. Every insecurity I'd buried surged to the surface, raw and undeniable. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to claw the smugness off his face. But I sat frozen, humiliation burning hotter than rage. In that moment, I saw the truth. I had never been his equal. I had been his project, his plaything, his experiment in slumming it with authenticity. And now that he was done, he could discard me without a flicker of remorse. I left his apartment that night with nothing but my dignity clutched in trembling hands. My clothes, my toothbrush, the fragments of myself I'd left scattered in his world, I abandoned them all. Because the woman who had walked into his life a year ago was gone. In her place stood something sharper. Something colder. And as I walked out into the Boston night, the city lights blurring through my tears, one thought burned brighter than the rest. He thought I wasn't built for his world. But he had no idea what I was capable of in mine. I spent the first week after leaving Daniel's apartment in a fog. Sleep came in jagged fragments, food turned to ash in my mouth. Every moment replayed itself in my head, his smirk, his condescension, the way he told me I wasn't built for his world. Those words lodged in me like shrapnel, but pain has a way of hardening into something sharper. Grief slowly calcified into resolve. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to crumble. If Daniel thought I was fragile, if he believed I was disposable, then I would prove him wrong in the only way that mattered. I would take the very foundation of his world, the wealth, the reputation, the untouchable charm, and turn it into a weapon against him. But revenge wasn't something you rushed. It wasn't a tantrum or a wild swing in the dark. If I was going to do this, it had to be deliberate, precise, surgical. So I planned. The first step was information. Daniel's arrogance was his greatest weakness. He spoke too freely, dismissing me as too naive to understand the intricacies of his empire. But I had listened, quietly, filing away names of associates, snippets of conversations about risky investments, the hushed mentions of a development project that skirted zoning laws. At the firm where I worked, I had access to records, city archives, and architectural filings. Long nights were spent combing through databases, connecting dots, piecing together the paper trail Daniel believed was invisible. It didn't take long to see the cracks, under-the-table deals, misfiled permits, safety violations glossed over with bribes. He'd built his empire like one of my sketches, impressive on the surface, but dangerously unstable underneath. The second step was patience. I couldn't act until I knew exactly where to strike. So I shadowed him from a distance, not physically, but digitally. His social calendar was practically public, documented in photographs and tagged locations. He was careless in his predictability, always orbiting the same restaurants, the same circles of power. Charlotte's name appeared often, woven into society columns, her presence beside him becoming less subtle by the week. It stung, yes, but it also fueled me. If he wanted to parade his betrayal, then fine. The higher he climbed with her, the further he would fall when I cut the rope. The third step was strategy. Revenge couldn't just be about destruction, it had to be about transformation. I needed to turn his strengths into liabilities, to make the very things he valued most, his wealth, his influence, his image, collapse around him. I divided the plan into 3 pillars: professional, social, and personal. Professional, Daniel's business was his lifeblood. If investors lost faith, if regulators came sniffing, his empire would bleed. With the records I gathered, I drafted anonymous reports, carefully curated packages of evidence highlighting his most egregious violations. Zoning fraud, safety oversights, conflicts of interest buried in contracts. I didn't send them all at once. No, that would be too easy. Instead, I planned to leak them strategically, one at a time, each new revelation eroding confidence, forcing him to scramble. Social, Daniel thrived on appearances. He needed to be admired, envied, and respected. Without that, he was hollow. I began cataloging his hypocrisies, the private disdain he'd shown for his friends, the mocking words he used about them when he thought no one was listening. I still had messages, emails, even a recording from one drunken night when he ranted about how his investors were idiots with checkbooks. In the right hands, those would spread like poison through his circle. Personal. This was the most delicate pillar. I wanted Daniel to feel what I felt, to doubt himself, to question his worth, to watch the foundation of intimacy crumble. But I couldn't touch him directly. Not yet. Instead, I would sow subtle fractures in his relationship with Charlotte. She was no fool, wealth had made her cautious, not blind. All I needed to do was let the right truths slip through the cracks, anonymous tips, subtle evidence of his duplicity, whispers designed to bloom into suspicion. There were nights I questioned myself. Was I becoming him? Cold, manipulative, cruel. But then I remembered the smirk on his face, the way he dismissed me as unworthy, the way he reduced me to nothing more than a temporary amusement. My revenge wasn't cruelty, it was justice. I didn't want to kill him, not literally. Death would be too quick, too merciful. I wanted him to live, to feel the slow suffocation of loss. To watch everything he valued corrode until he was left with nothing but the hollow echo of his arrogance. Each step I mapped out in meticulous detail. Timelines, contingencies, escape routes. I built my plan the way I built my designs, strong foundations, clean lines, no room for collapse. And I made sure no trace would ever lead back to me. I wasn't reckless. My digital footprints were erased, my actions cloaked in layers of anonymity. If Daniel ever suspected, it would be too late. One evening, weeks into my preparations, I stood by the window of my apartment, watching the city lights flicker like stars. I imagined Daniel in his penthouse across town, glass of scotch in hand, Charlotte by his side, certain that his world was unshakable. He had no idea that the blueprints of his downfall were already drawn. And I smiled, a cold, steady smile, because for the first time since he betrayed me, I felt powerful. Revenge wasn't just a fantasy anymore. It was construction. And soon, Daniel Monroe's empire would be nothing more than rubble. Revenge doesn't explode, it seeps. Like water through stone, it finds the cracks, widening them until the whole structure gives way. That was how I wanted Daniel to fall, not in a single dramatic collapse, but piece by piece, slowly stripped of everything he thought untouchable. I began with his work. The first anonymous package went to the Boston Zoning Board. Neatly compiled documents, schematics cross-checked with building codes, invoices tucked between bland memoranda. I knew the exact violations to highlight, the exact language regulators would seize upon. Within weeks, rumors circulated through the firm where I worked. Monroe Developments had come under review. Inspectors were reopening projects that had long been settled. Deadlines stretched, permits stalled, investors grew restless. Daniel brushed it off publicly. He always had that air of invincibility, but I knew the disruption was costing him. The second package, sent a month later to a local journalist hungry for scandal, carried a sharper edge, whistleblower-style notes about unsafe construction shortcuts, paired with evidence buried deep in the city's public records. The article went viral within hours. Gilded towers, rotten foundations, the headline read. For the first time, Daniel Monroe's name wasn't paired with glamour but with doubt. And that was only the beginning. While the professional cracks spread, I turned to his social circle. I still had the drunken recording from months ago, his slurred voice mocking the very men who bankrolled him. Idiots with checkbooks, throwing money at me because I looked the part. They wouldn't know a blueprint from a cocktail napkin. I sent the file anonymously to 3 of his closest associates. Within days, the gossip churned. Daniel noticed the shift immediately, the sidelong glances, the clipped tones during meetings, the invitations that suddenly stopped arriving. For a man like him, social exile was worse than prison. I didn't stop there. Using a burner account, I leaked fragments of private texts he'd sent me, the ones where he sneered about his so-called friends' pretentious wives, or mocked their philanthropic causes. Every revelation was timed like a metronome, steady and merciless. His polished image dulled by degrees until it cracked. But the sharpest knife was Charlotte. I didn't need to fabricate anything, the truth was potent enough. Screenshots of Daniel's late-night flirtations with other women. Proof of hotel receipts charged to his accounts while he claimed to be traveling for business. Charlotte, for all her privilege, wasn't blind to betrayal. I made sure she received each breadcrumb carefully spaced, each one impossible to dismiss. Their relationship disintegrated not with a bang but with ice. The photographs of them at galas disappeared from society pages. Daniel showed up at events alone, jaw tight, his smile brittle. Whispers followed him everywhere. Charlotte Whitmore dumped him. No one knew why, not exactly, but the story grew in the telling. In their world, perception was reality, and Daniel's reality was collapsing. The first time I saw him unravel in person was at a restaurant in Back Bay. I hadn't planned it, fate had placed him 2 tables over, his posture slumped, phone face down beside a half-finished drink. He looked smaller somehow, less radiant, the gloss stripped away. When he finally noticed me, his eyes lingered, confusion first, then a flicker of something raw. I smiled. Just a polite, passing smile, the kind you'd give a stranger. His jaw clenched, and he turned away. That was when I knew revenge was working. It wasn't just about what he lost, it was about seeing me, the woman he dismissed, standing unbroken in plain sight. Still, I wasn't finished. The final strike had to leave no doubt. Through a trusted contact at the firm, I arranged for a quiet leak of a confidential audit report. Nothing illegal on my part. I simply happened to leave the right documents accessible, knowing curious eyes would do the rest. The report revealed financial irregularities so glaring they could no longer be ignored. The SEC opened an investigation. Investors pulled funding. Contracts dissolved overnight. Daniel Monroe, once untouchable, was suddenly radioactive. I heard about the breakdown secondhand. A former colleague spotted him outside the courthouse, paparazzi snapping photos as he shoved through the crowd, hair unkempt, eyes hollow. The headline the next morning was merciless: Monroe Empire teeters amid scandal. I saved the clipping. Not to gloat, not exactly, but to remind myself that even marble cracks when the foundation is weak. Did it heal me? Not entirely. The scars were still there, humiliation, heartbreak, the echo of his smirk in the dark. But watching him fall gave me something deeper than closure. It gave me proof. Proof that I wasn't powerless. Proof that the world he claimed I wasn't built for could be bent, reshaped, even shattered, if I chose to wield the right tools. One night, months after his empire began crumbling, I walked past one of his stalled developments. The half-finished tower loomed like a skeleton against the skyline, cranes frozen midair, work abandoned. I pressed my hand against the cool metal of the fence and whispered, "This is mine now." Because in a way, it was. His ruin was my design. And unlike the buildings he built, mine would never collapse. People talk about revenge like it's a fire, something that burns hot, devours, leaves only ash. But for me, it was something colder. A chisel, carving away the parts of me that had been weak, gullible, desperate for validation. By the time Daniel's empire collapsed, I was no longer the woman who had stood trembling in his penthouse, begging to know why I wasn't enough. I never got an apology. Men like Daniel don't apologize. They justify. They rewrite the story in their heads until they are the victim, the misunderstood genius, the casualty of envy. I used to think I needed to hear him say he was sorry, that he regretted what he did to me. But I learned something far more valuable: his regret was irrelevant. What mattered was mine had already transformed into something else. In the quiet aftermath, I rebuilt, not just my routine, but myself. At the firm, I stopped hiding. For years, I'd been the reliable workhorse, quietly competent, never demanding recognition. But dismantling Daniel's empire had reminded me of my own intelligence, my own precision. I began taking risks at work, pitching designs with confidence, pushing my ideas forward. People listened. They respected me. For the first time, I didn't shrink in the presence of power, I met it head-on. Socially, I learned to stop apologizing for where I came from. My parents' modest house, my student loans, my thrift store years, they weren't stains to scrub away. They were proof I had survived, proof I knew how to build something real. Daniel's world was marble and glass, polished on the outside and rotten underneath. Mine was brick and steel, weathered but enduring. There were moments of loneliness, yes. Nights when I thought of what might have been if Daniel had chosen me fully, if he had been the man I wanted him to be. But then I remembered the smirk on his lips when he told me I wasn't built for his world. I remembered the way his eyes glinted with amusement as he dismissed me like a phase he'd outgrown. Those memories didn't break me anymore. They fueled me. They reminded me that what I'd built for myself was stronger than anything he had tried to offer. The final time I saw him was almost anticlimactic. He was sitting outside a coffee shop in Cambridge, unshaven, his suit wrinkled, the once sharp edge of him dulled. He didn't notice me at first, and I didn't announce myself. I simply walked past, my head high, heels clicking against the pavement. But as I passed, his eyes lifted, and for a fleeting second, our gazes met. There was no recognition of superiority in his stare anymore, only bitterness. Perhaps even fear. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. The silence between us was enough. He knew. Walking away, I realized revenge hadn't just destroyed him. It freed me. I no longer lived under the weight of needing someone else's validation. I no longer measured myself by whether I fit into rooms full of people who thought wealth was the only form of worth. I had carved out something Daniel could never touch: dignity. And dignity, once claimed, cannot be stolen. I went home that evening, poured myself a glass of wine, and sat by the window overlooking the city. The skyline glittered, towers rising against the night. For years, I had looked at those buildings and thought they belonged to men like Daniel. Now, I see them differently. They weren't symbols of a world I didn't belong to. They were challenges. Blueprints waiting to be redrawn. Because I was no longer just surviving. I was building. And this time, the foundation was unshakable.